Myself a little bit. So I am the formal title is Group Director of R&D at Technology One, but better described as Head of R&D at Tech One. Technology One's a Brisbane headquartered international software company. We do business software and large-scale business software. We build operational software for university student management systems, local government systems, ports, airports, a lot of asset-intensive industries and things like that. So high-end enterprise software. People would say we compete with organisations like SAP and Oracle in the application space, but ironically we actually don't see them in our industries very often. The industries we're in, we see companies like Infor, who are the third largest software company in the world for enterprise software after Oracle and SAP, Civica, Maximo, organisations like that. But business software, and at the end of my talk I'll talk a little bit about enterprise software and how I think that's different to the different types of software that you might build in your career. But I'll come back to a little bit about myself first. I think from the brief I was given, the perspective, I'll talk a little bit about myself, a little bit about my career, and then a little bit about what we do to try and give you guys a perspective of the sorts of things you might do in your career as you go on this journey. Is that a fair brief, Dragon? All right, cool. I know there's a couple of you in the room that have seen me speak before, so I could probably spend an hour going any direction that you wanted me to. And to a certain extent, I'm happy to go where you want in terms of questions, right? So I'll talk about my things, but if you feel like you want to drill into something a little bit more, just jump in and we'll go AMA style if you want to. A little bit about myself. So I'm a Brizzy boy. I grew up in the eastern suburbs of Brisbane. I did a business computing degree at another university. One that's close to us, but not here, and we do joke about that a fair bit down at Tech One, about which part of the river you went to university at, and all the boys back there in the office gave me a hard time about coming into unfamiliar territory this afternoon. But I did a business computing degree in the late 80s, which was an interesting time because at that time we were really seeing relational technology grab traction, right? So the notion of a relational database in SQL, and I was made to feel a little bit of a dinosaur last night at a talk like this I gave at QUT, where one of the second year students came up to me and said, "What's a relational database?" And I hope that it was just that he hadn't seen them before, but it was just that it generally didn't matter to him anymore because there are so many other different types of databases in the world. So a little upsetting to me, and add another stripe on the dinosaur tag. But at that time in the 80s, the white paper on relational theory from IBM came out around, I think it was around 77. And Larry Ellison founded Oracle in about 82 on the back of a couple of $1 million from the CIA to go build a relational database based on the IBM white paper. And through the 80s, we saw relational really power the enterprise software boom. Right? It was with 4GLs and relational databases, we were able to build a lot of software very quickly. So my generation, if you like, grew on the back of that technology. So I did my degree back then. Worked for Queensland. I worked for Queensland Investment Corp, actually, QIC. They were born out of Queensland government in 1991, and they hired 4 graduates that year as a part of building this new organisation. I was one of those 4 graduates, and I was responsible for installing and maintaining their Oracle database and implementing Oracle apps as their financial management system. So I did my first 2 years there, took advantage of the quasi-government organisation. They put me on 13 Oracle training courses in 2 years, which turned out to be really good because my next job was at Oracle. And but that was all partly planned, right? I'd always had this notion that as a software guy and somebody who wanted to build big enterprise software, that the right place to head towards was going to be Silicon Valley. And I just kind of had to navigate my way through the Brisbane market to work out how the hell I was going to get there. I think it's a lot easier these days. We get a lot more awareness of what you can do with those things these days than we had back in the early 90s. But that was my path, so I just worked my butt off for 2 years at QIC, helped them build a lot of systems, as I say, and then was offered a job at Oracle as a technical pre-sales consultant, which back in those days pretty much meant if you weren't on site implementing something as a consultant, you were in the pre-sales team selling the stuff that you're about to implement for a customer. So I spent my time somewhere between doing installs of new software in our pre-sales environments and demonstrating it, and then working with customers around Australia and New Guinea, implementing and configuring that software. As a software developer at heart, what I did as a consultant and pre-sales person was look for efficient ways to do the things they kept asking me to do. So back in those days, I'd be modifying invoice print programs and payroll interfaces to third-party systems and things like that. And rather than just build, bespoke every time, I look for opportunities to productize for myself what I was doing. So as a consultant, I became very popular because I was in and out of sites very quickly because I was reusing things, right? And that's the magic of software, right? When you build software for a reusable basis, you get scale and efficiency. I was doing that. I had great utilisation rates as a consultant, and probably most importantly for me, I got a reputation. And early in 1995, which I dread to ask is probably like before some of you guys were born, right? I love it when I get the resumes now, born in. It's like, what? Anyway, 95, I got this call from Oracle HQ, because I'm down here in Australia. We're very much a little satellite of Oracle, if you like. And I got this call from Oracle HQ in the apps division saying, we've heard about some of these tools you've been building. Would you like to productize them? And I'm like, hell yeah. How fast can I get over there? And the answer to that question was 6 weeks. So from the phone call to when I landed in Redwood Shores, which is right on the peninsula, right at the top of Silicon Valley, for those people who actually know how Silicon Valley works, because there's always this joke about Silicon Valley is actually Santa Clara Valley, which is where Palo Alto and Menlo Park are, and when those places, that's actually the valley. So Redwood Shores and the city and whatever else is actually not technically in Silicon Valley, but Larry redefined Silicon Valley to include Redwood Shores. And everyone in San Francisco now calls themselves Silicon Valley. But I landed in Redwood Shores July 8th, 1995. Which was a cool time to end up in the valley for two reasons. We were still calling the internet the information superhighway. Netscape wasn't a year old. And all these big enterprise vendors were about to go on this journey of two things. We were about to go on the dot-com boom, and we're about to go on the Y2K boom. And in enterprise software, the Y2K boom was more of an enabler for sales and product development than actually the internet boom was. But we had them both in parallel. So I joined the general ledger team in 95 to productize the things I'd been building. And at that point, the apps division within Oracle was 500 people and 32 products. And in the 5 years from 95 to 2000, we grew from 500 people to 5,000 people, and from 32 products to 230 products. So better to be lucky than good. It was a great time to land in the valley and go through that journey. And I say two things I got to learn. I got to learn about enterprise software, but I also got on the back of the dot-com boom and what we were doing with the early days of HTML and enterprise software. From my perspective, I just treated it like an entrepreneurial opportunity. So I just worked like an entrepreneur, but inside Oracle. 18-hour days, 7 days a week, just worked my can off many, many times, fell asleep in the bottom of the shower in the morning because I was just so tired. But that's what you do when you're in startup mode. My best mate from Brisbane, John Richardson, I got him over a couple of months after me, and the two of us actually built a bunch of products for Oracle that ended up being really, really popular. And in the course of the first 3 years, we ended up building a team around us and ultimately ended up taking on some big projects for the company, including one I did directly for Larry Ellison in early '98, where he wanted to add, you'll all laugh, you'll go, we added business intelligence to our apps division, right? And you'll all go, oh, BI, freaking everybody does BI. Well, I can tell you in '98, nobody was doing BI. And Larry wanted to outrun SAP with our next major release, which was to come out in April of '98. We were going to ship embedded business intelligence in Oracle apps. This was decided in February, and we were releasing in April, May. The trade show was actually in April. And Larry went, oh, I need to find somebody who can break all the rules and deliver a product to market in 2 months after we'd been spent 2 years building this next release, and my boss volunteered me. And that was pretty cool, because literally it was like, go build this thing. It's got to be HTML. This is '98. It's got to be HTML based. It's got to be embedded BI. It's got to work across 200 odd products. Away you go, just do it. And 1 month we prototyped it. He gave me a 20-person team. We prototyped the framework. After, say, 4 weeks later, we took in a demo to him and said, what do you reckon? He gave us his honest opinion. We took that feedback on board, and in the next month we basically productized it. Second month we went from that 20, 30-person team to a 200-person team. They basically gave us people for every product, and we productized this BI product. And the coolest part about that particular journey was that he was going to demo this brand new BI tool at the launch at one of our user trade conferences. We had 9,000 people coming into San Diego to see the launch of this major new app. It was apps version 11, and Larry's going to do this demo of this BI thing. and I had to show him how to do the demo. And he's a very busy man, so we'd sort of organised Thursday. The big show was Sunday night. We'd organised a demo to him on a Thursday. He ended up being too busy to meet with us. Rescheduled to Friday. Still too busy to meet with us. He's in Washington DC or some excuse. Fine, we'll do the demo on Saturday. Still too busy. And it's like, dude, you got to see this thing. You're demoing it Sunday night. He said, no, plenty of time. You can do the demo on a plane. And so what happened on Sunday is literally he said, meet me out at the local airport. I'll fly you down to San Diego myself in the Learjet. And once I get the plane up, I'll come back and you can do the demo. And that's what we did. So we did the demo on the back of his plane on the way down to San Diego, which that's pretty cool, right? So I had that kind of opportunity in that part of my career where I learnt to build products. Interestingly, probably the most important thing I learned at Oracle was how you can make markets. Right? There's lots of us that learn how to use tools and use frameworks and be downstream and leverage what other people's doing. But what you really want to get to in your career is where you're inventing the next thing. And at an organisation like Oracle, Larry took pride in moving markets, and he taught us how to do that. And so that was a great skill I learned from that. Just be confident in yourself, build something that's fundamentally different, and steer the market towards that outcome. So they were the early days of my Oracle days. Around about 2000. We started working with Larry on the idea of establishing an R&D centre right here in Brisbane. It was interesting. Larry kept saying, what is it with you Aussies? Because that's how they say it. What is it with you Aussies? You seem to be able to do all these projects with very few people. And I said, that's just how we are, right? There's not that many people down under, and we're all pretty smart, and we're all pretty good at breaking rules, right? We're all convicts. Oh, that's what the British keep saying. And but no, it was actually really interesting. At Oracle HQ, there was lots and lots of Aussies who'd gone over to HQ and who were just used to getting stuff done. Right? Often Larry would give a project to an American, and an American's first request was, well, I need a team of 100 people of specialists to do all the bits. And all of us Aussies would just go, oh yeah, I'll have a crack tonight and show it to you tomorrow. Right? And he just didn't believe that was possible until it happened, like 100 times in a row. So in 2000, I said to him, mate, there's 30 million of them down there. You might be able to tap into that. And it was also the time that Peter Beattie, whether you like the politics or not, doesn't matter, but Peter Beattie was flying around the world selling Smart State. And he popped up in California and said, can I pop in and see Larry and talk about Queensland? And I'm like, happy, please. I've been trying to convince him for a while that there's a thing to do. So we told Larry Ellison that the governor of Queensland was coming, and that he'd have the opportunity to meet with him and talk about Australia as a destination. And that was a great meeting. There was just 4 of us. It was the state manager for Oracle in Queensland, myself, Peter Beattie, and Larry Ellison, just wrapping around what we might do with R&D in Australia. And shortly after that, he said, fine, go establish an R&D centre, put 70 people in Brisbane. And so in 2000, we did that. John Richardson, my mate, came back, established that centre in the city, and we hired a bunch of people to work on enterprise software. I'll hand over to you in about an hour. You'll get the lectern. But it's interesting. My co-speaker tonight actually is what I call the Sun part of that R&D centre now. So when Oracle and Sun came together, the Sun Development Centre that was based out here at UQ actually joined into that R&D centre that's that Oracle has here in Brisbane still to this day. So for me, that was a proud achievement to be able to bring R&D from Oracle back to Australia and allow more of us here to participate in what Oracle does. Mid-2000s, I jumped out and did the startup thing because, every software guy thinks that they're going to be Larry Ellison themselves or Bill Gates themselves. I did a couple of startups, a great journey, quickly worked out there's a big difference between intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship. Intrapreneurship, you just got to come up with great ideas and sell it to 100,000 customers that you've already got in your business. As an entrepreneur, you've got to go find the customers from scratch, and that's freaking hard. I spent 6 years being a sales guy, not a software guy. Learned a lot, got my scars, learnt to appreciate what I do as a software guy a lot more. At the end of that journey, I decided I really wanted to be an enterprise software guy because that's where my whole career had been. And I went to Technology One, because if you want to work on enterprise software in Brisbane, there's not a whole lot of choices for HQ-based enterprise software companies in Brisbane, but Tech One for me was the logical choice. So I touched base with them and said, what have you got available? And they gave me an R&D manager position for one of their 10 products at the time. And that was in 2010, that's right, that was my midlife crisis. I joined Tech One. And what I bring to them, obviously, is that perspective, all those things that I learned at Oracle around really large-scale software. Like my biggest customer that was using software I wrote was Citigroup, and they had my software running in 100 countries in 32 languages, 170,000 concurrent users, right? You know, when your software's running at that scale, there's all sorts of problems you're thinking about solving that you don't think about when you're just trying to build an app, right? It's a, you know, it's a whole different world of problems, right? A single bug costs you, you know, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to respond to in the marketplace, right? You know, so I had 30,000 companies around the world using the software I wrote. Screw that up, you can't hire enough people to take the phone call, right? So it's a very different profile of software. So I bring that experience to Tech One. You know, after 6 years at Tech One, as I say, I now head up R&D, and I'm taking Tech One on that journey in terms of global enterprise software, high scale, very, you know, extreme high quality, very much off the shelf. And over that same journey, Technology One's been moving from an on-premise company to a SaaS company. You know, for enterprise software, that's the fundamental shift in the market, right? Nobody wants to install software on-prem anymore and manage boxes and routes and load balancers and all that stuff. They'd much prefer just to hit a URL and solve their business problem, right? So SaaS is a pivot for us, right? As a company, if we don't get SaaS sorted out, we're dead, right? Every industry will become like the consumer spaces are, right? So our two biggest markets are local government and higher education. Doesn't matter, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, it doesn't matter. Sometime in that horizon, the way the world market will work is there'll be two companies that compete to offer that solution as an industry, as SaaS, just like Salesforce does for CRM now, right? If you want a CRM, what do you buy, right? Salesforce or something else, right? It's that simple, right? Workday, which is really PeopleSoft 2.0, for those that don't know the history of how these things work. The guys at PeopleSoft made a bunch of money by selling PeopleSoft to Oracle, and Dave Duffield and his mates went and started Workday. Workday is not an overnight success. They've been working on that for about 10 years now. Workday's back in the market, but they were born on the cloud as a SaaS company. And they will define markets that they're in now. So as what you'd call a legacy software company, we had to work at how we're going to respond to that. It's an interesting journey. How do you manage? For us, we get $100 million a year in annual support fees from our existing 1,000 customers. And you can't tell those customers to say, oh, well, you shouldn't do it that way anymore. You should go do it this new way. Because if you say that to a customer, often they'll go, well, you know, maybe I'll go back to market. And when you've got $100 million a year riding just on the back of that, you want to be very respectful of how you take those customers on that journey. So as a company, one of our greatest challenges right now is how do we keep those people happy that bought into the way that we did things over the last 27 years and then slowly edge them over to, you know, what we want is SaaS. There's so many reasons why SaaS is better for us. We think it's better for them too, but you've got to take them on that journey. The other $100 million a year that we do in business comes from consulting and new license sales. Consulting just follows new license sales. We sell a new customer, the consultants implement it. So that part of the business is okay, right? Because what's happening, every tender that comes to market now, they all want it SaaS, right? They don't want to buy boxes anymore and all that kind of stuff, right? They just want it to work. So it's an interesting time for our business, but R&D is really focused on how do we build that new generation of software while making sure it still works with the existing generation. And in enterprise software, that's probably a 10-year window. It's interesting, we get into conversations, like we hire about 20 graduates a year into our R&D centre, and we often get into these conversations with people just like yourself going, you know, why aren't you using Node and Mean and Bootstrap and you freaking dinosaurs, you're not using today's framework? And we're like, you know what, every time we make that decision, we've got to live with it for 10 years. So if we make that decision every 3 months, every 6 months, every 12 months, based on whatever the latest gadget is, we get stuck with that decision for every single one of them for at least 10 years, because that's how long it takes to get some of these customers off this stuff once you get them hooked on it. So it's really interesting for us to balance between, you know, we really need to be up to date because all those new things are good for all the reasons that they're good, but we've got to commercialise it, take it to 1,000 customers who are large organisations, convince them to use it, and once they're on it, they're going to stick on it for a while. So it's always a bit of a balancing act. We're right at the end of a project that's been going on for 5 years now, where our legacy code base, the one that our customers are all running on today, it's actually a VB.NET code base, right? And everybody chuckles, oh God, why would you build anything in VB.NET? Well, let me tell you, it seemed a good idea in 2000, right? And, you know, in hindsight, 15 years later, it has aged. We laugh about this in the office, right? Because everybody's like, oh, you got to get on JavaScript and Node. And I'm like, yeah, and in 10 years' time, you'll all be going, that's all crap and there's something better too, right? It's just interesting progressing through the generations. COBOL was good once too, right? So, these things are always changing. But yeah, we're right at the end of a multi-year project. We started in 2010 to get rid of the VB.NET stuff. That's all written in C# and it's JavaScript at the front end, and it's adaptive UI and all those things you'd expect of a modern application. But we started that 5 years ago, and we've probably got about 18 months left to finish it. It wasn't much of a project. I think we had about 3,000 screens across our 12 products, about 20 million lines of code that we had to work out how we're going to move forward. There are some people who like lines of code. There are some people who don't like lines of code. As an enterprise software guy, every line of code is a risk for one of those really expensive bugs. So it's always a balance. As software guys, we like lines of code because that's how we validate ourselves, right? Because who wants to use a framework? Because that's for people who don't know how to code. But on the flip side, if you're an enterprise software guy, there's a part of me that's sitting there going, you know what, I'd really like all my developers to just do stuff in metadata, because then I can just change the framework underneath and have the metadata adapt to technology over time. But every developer thinks that's boring. So it's a really interesting world that we work in when we're trying to balance these things up. But that's what we do. We're right at the end of that journey of moving to C# controllers and HTML and JavaScript and all that sort of stuff at the front end. And in about the next 12 months, we'll move into a next generation, right? And we've got to start having these religious debates about, should it be mean? What should it be, right? Like, we think it's probably something like microservices. We think it's probably something like multiple database types. Like, a couple of years ago, we went, oh, well, we got to get onto something after relational, right? But it's really interesting. It's like, at the data storage layer, it's actually not about picking one anymore. It's like, what's the right caching technology, right? What's the right relation? When's the right time to use relational? When's the right time to use time series? When's the right time to use these different things? So we, in the next year, are going to start looking at all those options and say, okay, what's the architecture for the next 10 years, if you like, in our software? All right, so I'm probably at time. I went at 100 miles an hour, but I just want to sort of give you an overview of what we do. So if you're thinking about enterprise software, there's a perspective of a career and what we do. Cheers. Yeah. So what's a client that Tech1 has? So actually, really good examples. QUT is actually a customer, so the student management system out at QUT. So you guys use PeopleSoft, which is an Oracle product now, because it's branded that way. But QUT and about 12 of the universities around Australia use our student management system. So, enrolment, class structures, all that stuff that you do. In the local government space, we've actually got about 250 local councils across Australia and New Zealand. So large councils, small councils, Blacktown, Sunny Coast, Sunshine Coast, Logan, Redlands, all of those councils use our software to run councils. Federal government, Treasury runs our software, so the Treasury Department, ABS runs our software. Brisbane Airport runs our software. So it's interesting. The market we're in is basically either government, quasi-government. It was an interesting strategic decision. Adrian DeMarco is our founder. Great decision he made early on. The industries we're in are all industries that are basically tied to population growth and GDP. So we don't go through boom and bust, right? So there are companies that sell software to mining companies, right? And mining does this and mining does that, and they sell the software and then the company goes bust and then nothing ever. In our markets, we don't see any massive booms, but we don't see any decline either. And all our licenses tied to usage rate. So when we sell to universities, it's full-time student load. Well, what's the general trend of students at universities in Australia, right? It's generally a slow tick upwards forever, right? Local government, we price based on rateable properties. Well, if the population goes up, the number of rateable properties go up, right? So as a company, our revenue is quite protected, right? It's basically tied to GDP. So that's exciting from the perspective that we invest 20% of our revenue back into R&D every year, which is a pretty big number. So this year we spent 45 million in R&D. It's exciting from an R&D perspective because I can count on it. It's not one of those things where, some software companies are like, well, this year we got 20 mil to spend, but next year we've only got 10 million to spend because the market's a bit dry, right? For us, we can bank what revenues we've got and away we go. Some people say it's less exciting because we don't have any hockey sticks, right? So, where's the massive growth curve, right? But, I'd much rather be this company where, every year we do 15% profit. There's a bit of money to spend every year, but that's kind of that's the entrepreneur's perspective. Entrepreneur, they're sitting there going, I want hockey stick, unicorn, $1 billion valuation. It's like, well, that's great if you're the one in 10,000 that does it, and the other. I've been on the other side. It's a pain, so it's not nice when you're on the other side of that hockey stick. But that's different perspectives. I love entrepreneurship where I've got that safety to invent and build next generation software. Yeah, Tech One hiring. Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually interesting. We hire interns and graduates. We hire twice a year. We do intern and intake at the beginning of the two big holidays, right? Because we want to onboard people properly. So we onboard in June and we onboard in December. That's for interns, and then graduates. We tend to bring the graduates in at the end of the holidays, because when some graduates finish mid-year, some graduates finish end of the year, pretty much everybody wants to take a little bit of some type of holiday before they start. So we take the interns at the start of holidays, get them going, and then we take the graduates at the end of holidays, and away we go. As I said, we hire about 20 grads a year, 20 interns a year as well. So we tend to do, on average, it goes up and down a little bit, but about 10 interns each time and about 10 graduates each time. What's been really interesting is the intern program's so successful now that pretty much all we're hiring is interns, because the vast majority of the interns just graduate to graduates. So like for January next year, I've only got 2 or 3 grad positions I have to fill, because the interns are all just transitioning from intern to graduate. But yeah, we hire twice a year. If anybody's interested in that stuff, it's just Tech1, technologyonecorp.com careers. So we got that. You can just apply through there. Thanks, Darren. Cheers. All right, good. Cheers. Thanks, guys.